I knew the storm was coming 3 days before it hit, which is exactly why I built the generator shed in the first place. My name is Keith Donovan, and I had lived in the Riverside Meadows community in suburban Cincinnati, Ohio, for exactly 8 months when everything went sideways. The neighborhood was one of those planned developments where every house looked like a slightly different variation of the same architectural blueprint, with manicured lawns and strict rules about what color you could paint your mailbox. When my wife Rachel and I moved in, we thought it would be perfect for starting our family. The schools were good, the neighbors seemed friendly enough, and the price was right. What we didn't count on was Patricia Henderson. Patricia was the president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown and wielded like a weapon. She was 52 years old with an asymmetrical blonde bob that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. And she had that particular brand of self-righteousness that only comes from having too much time and too little actual responsibility. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I would see her power walking through the neighborhood in her expensive athletic wear, taking photos of minor violations on her phone. A trash can left out past noon, a garden gnome that didn't meet the aesthetic standards. Once, she cited someone for having the wrong shade of beige on their garage door. I first ran into trouble with Patricia in late October. The weather forecasts were predicting a harsh winter, and living in Ohio, I knew that meant potential power outages. My grandmother had frozen to death during a blackout in the winter of 1978, back before I was born, and my father had drilled into me the importance of emergency preparedness. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I researched generators, bought a quality one that could power my entire house, and built a small shed to house it properly in my backyard. The shed was 8 feet by 6 feet, constructed from pressure-treated lumber, painted a tasteful gray that matched my house's trim. I had positioned it in the far corner of my backyard, barely visible from the street. I even made sure it met all the local building codes and got the proper permits from the city. It took me 2 full weekends to build, but when I was done, I was proud of it. The generator inside was a Champion 12,000-watt model, professionally installed with a transfer switch that would automatically kick on if we lost power. It was safe, legal, and necessary. On November 2nd, I came home from my job as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant to find a bright orange violation notice stuck to my front door. Dear resident, it read in that passive-aggressive tone that HOA notices always seem to have. It has come to our attention that you have constructed an unauthorized structure on your property. According to Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Riverside Meadows Community Guidelines, all outbuildings, sheds, and auxiliary structures must receive written approval from the HOA Architectural Review Committee before construction begins. Your shed was built without such approval and is therefore in violation. You have 30 days to remove the structure or face daily fines of $50. Please contact the HOA office to discuss compliance. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson, HOA President. I stood on my front porch reading the notice 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each word. The shed was in my backyard. It wasn't an eyesore. It wasn't affecting anyone. And more importantly, I had checked the HOA guidelines before building it. I pulled out my phone and opened the PDF of the community rules I had saved when we moved in. Section 7, Paragraph 4 did indeed mention that outbuildings required approval, but it specifically stated that this applied to structures visible from the street or neighboring properties. My shed was neither. The next day, I took a personal day off work and went to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the community pool. Patricia was there, sitting behind a desk that was far too large for the small room, working on her laptop. She looked up when I entered, and her smile was the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Keith Donovan," I said, even though she obviously knew who I was. "I received this violation notice about my generator shed." "Ah, yes," Patricia said, folding her hands on the desk. "The unapproved structure. According to the guidelines, I only need approval for structures visible from the street or neighboring properties. My shed isn't visible from either." Patricia's smile tightened. "I can see it from the Martinsons' second-floor bathroom window." I blinked. "You were in the Martinsons' bathroom looking into my backyard. I was conducting a routine inspection at their request," she said smoothly. "And regardless of visibility, all structures require approval. We updated that policy 6 months ago. I never received notification of any policy change." "It was in the monthly newsletter." "I never received a monthly newsletter." Patricia sighed as if I was being deliberately difficult. "Mr. Donovan, the rules are quite clear. You need to either submit your shed for retroactive approval, which will require a fee and a review period of 60 to 90 days, or remove it within 30 days. And what happens during the review period? I just don't have a generator shed while we go through winter." "The review process exists for a reason. We need to maintain the aesthetic integrity and property values of our community." I felt my jaw clench. "It's a generator shed. It's for emergency preparedness. We could lose power this winter." "Then perhaps you should have thought about that before building without permission." Patricia turned back to her laptop, clearly considering the conversation over. "You have 30 days, Mr. Donovan." I left the office furious but determined to handle this properly. That evening, I drafted a formal letter requesting retroactive approval for the shed, including photos, dimensions, and documentation showing that it met all city building codes. I submitted it through the HOA's online portal and paid the $75 review fee. 2 weeks passed with no response. I called the HOA office multiple times, always getting voicemail. I sent follow-up emails. Nothing. On November 20th, another notice appeared on my door. This one informed me that my 30 days were almost up and that I had not taken action to comply. I still had 10 days, technically, but the notice made it sound like I was already in violation. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for November 23rd. The meetings were held in the community center, and according to the bylaws, any homeowner could attend and speak during the public comment period. When I arrived at 7 p.m., there were maybe a dozen other residents scattered throughout the small meeting room. Patricia sat at a table at the front with 4 other board members, 2 men and 2 women, all roughly her age. I recognized one of them as Gregory Stevens, who lived 3 houses down from me. I had helped him jump-start his car once, and he had seemed like a reasonable guy. The meeting began with standard business, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing the holiday decoration contest, and debating whether the community should switch landscaping companies. I waited through 45 minutes of tedious discussion before Patricia finally opened the floor for public comments. I stood up. "Keith Donovan, 847 Maple Ridge Drive. I'm here about the generator shed in my backyard. I submitted a request for retroactive approval 2 weeks ago and have heard nothing back, but I keep receiving violation notices." Patricia didn't even look at me. "Your request is under review." "Under review for what?" "I provided all the necessary documentation. The shed meets every building code." "It's not visible from the street. What exactly is there to review?" "The Architectural Review Committee meets once a month," Patricia said. They haven't convened yet to discuss your request. When will they convene? December 15th. That's after my 30-day deadline. You're going to fine me for something while it's still under review. Patricia finally looked up. You built the structure before receiving approval, Mr. Donovan. The fines will accrue until you either remove it or receive approval. If you're approved, the fines will be waived retroactively. If you're denied, you'll need to pay the fines and remove the structure. That's insane, I said, and several other residents murmured in agreement. You're punishing me for following the city building codes while waiting for an approval process that I didn't even know I needed. Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse, Patricia said primly. Is there anything else? I looked at Gregory, hoping for some support, but he was studying his papers and wouldn't meet my eyes. None of the other board members said anything. Yeah, there's something else, I said. There's a major winter storm predicted for next month. The Weather Service is saying it could be one of the worst in years. My generator shed is there to protect my family in case we lose power. If something happens to them because you forced me to remove my emergency equipment, I'll hold you personally responsible. Patricia's expression didn't change. Are you threatening me, Mr. Donovan? I'm telling you that your petty enforcement of arbitrary rules could have real consequences. The consequences of not following community guidelines are outlined in your HOA agreement. Next comment, please. I sat down, shaking with anger and frustration. An older woman a few rows ahead of me stood up and began complaining about a neighbor's dog, and just like that, I was dismissed. When December 1st arrived, so did the fines. $50 per day, automatically added to my HOA account. I called a lawyer, and he reviewed my HOA agreement and the community guidelines. His assessment wasn't encouraging. You signed a contract when you bought the house, he explained over the phone. The HOA does have the authority to regulate structures on your property. Whether their interpretation of the rules is reasonable is debatable, but fighting this would require going to court, which could cost thousands of dollars. Your best bet is to go through their approval process. They're fining me while I go through the approval process. They're within their rights to do that based on the contract language. I'm sorry. I hung up and stared at my generator shed through the kitchen window. Rachel came up beside me, her hand on my shoulder. Maybe we should just take it down, she said quietly. Build it again once they approve it. It's the principle, I said. They're wrong and they're being petty tyrants about it. I know, but is it worth hundreds of dollars in fines? I didn't have a good answer to that. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched the fines accumulate. $50 a day added up fast. By December 15th, when the Architectural Review Committee finally met to discuss my shed, I was already in the hole for $700. The committee's decision came via email on December 18th. Application denied. The reason given was that the shed's design didn't match the architectural aesthetic of the community, and its placement in the corner of the yard created an unbalanced visual flow. It was complete nonsense, and we both knew it. The email also informed me that I now had 15 days to remove the shed, or the fines would increase to $100 per day. I spent that evening sitting in my garage, staring at the shed through the open back door, drinking a beer and considering my options. I could tear down the shed, lose all the money I had invested in it plus the fines, and hope we didn't lose power this winter. I could refuse and let the fines pile up, eventually leading to a lien on my property. Or I could find another way. That's when I remembered something. I pulled out the community guidelines again and read through them carefully, this time focusing on the exact wording. Section 7, Paragraph 4 prohibited permanent structures without approval, but there was nothing in there about temporary structures. And technically, since I had built the shed without a concrete foundation and instead placed it on gravel and concrete blocks, it could be considered temporary. It could be moved. The next morning, I went back to the HOA office. Patricia was there again, and her expression when she saw me was one of barely concealed satisfaction. "Mr. Donovan, I assume you're here to discuss removing your shed. Actually, I'm here to inform you that I'm converting it to a temporary structure," I said. According to Section 7, temporary structures don't require approval. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Your shed is clearly permanent. It's not on a foundation. It's sitting on blocks. I can move it whenever I want." The definition of temporary in our guidelines refers to structures that are only present for a short duration, like a party tent or a portable storage pod during a move. "Show me where it says that." Patricia pulled up the guidelines on her computer, scrolling through them. I waited, knowing she wouldn't find specific language defining temporary. After a few minutes, she looked up. "This is clearly an attempt to circumvent the rules. I'm following the rules as written." If the HOA wants to change the definition of temporary structures, they're welcome to do so, but they can't retroactively apply it to my situation. I'll be bringing this to the board's attention. You do that. I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Patricia, there's a major storm coming in 4 days. Weather Service is predicting potential power outages. I hope everyone has made preparations." I walked out before she could respond. The storm that hit Cincinnati on December 22nd was worse than anyone predicted. It started as freezing rain in the early morning hours, coating everything in ice. By noon, it had transitioned to heavy snow, the kind that falls so thick you can barely see 10 feet ahead. The wind picked up around 3 p.m., howling through the neighborhood and knocking down tree branches that were already heavy with ice. I was home with Rachel, watching the news coverage and monitoring our power. Our house stayed warm and lit, but I could see transformers exploding in the distance, bright flashes against the dark gray sky. Around 5 p.m., our power flickered once, twice, then died. 10 seconds later, I heard the beautiful sound of my generator kicking on. The lights came back, the heating system resumed its quiet hum, and Rachel let out a relieved laugh. "You're a genius," she said, kissing my cheek. Through our front window, I could see the rest of the neighborhood going dark. House after house, all the lights went out. The street lamps died. The only illumination came from the snow itself and the occasional flash of emergency vehicles in the distance. I felt a twinge of sympathy for my neighbors. Most of them were good people who had nothing to do with the HOA's decisions. But that sympathy didn't extend to Patricia Henderson, whose house was visible from our living room window, 3 houses down on the opposite side of the street. Her windows were as dark as everyone else's. The power stayed out all night. The temperature outside dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind chill made it feel like 0. Inside our house, we were comfortable. I had filled the bathtubs with water before the storm hit, just in case, and we had plenty of food. The generator purred away in its shed, doing exactly what I had built it to do. The next morning, Christmas Eve day, the storm had passed, but the damage was extensive. Trees were down all over the neighborhood. Power lines sagged under the weight of ice. I bundled up and went outside to clear our driveway, and I saw neighbors emerging from their houses looking exhausted and cold. Tom Martinez from next door came over as I was shoveling. "You've got power?" he asked, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Generator," I said, smart. "I wish I had thought of that. We've been freezing all night. My wife and kids are at her mother's place across town. They still have power there. Sorry to hear that. You're welcome to come over and warm up, charge your phone, whatever you need." Really? Man, that would be amazing. Over the next hour, word spread. Neighbors started showing up at my door, and Rachel and I found ourselves running an impromptu warming center. We made coffee, let people charge their devices, and even heated up soup for a couple of elderly residents who looked genuinely hypothermic. Our living room was full of grateful neighbors wrapped in blankets. Patricia drove by around noon in her expensive SUV, probably returning from wherever she had sheltered during the storm. She slowed down when she saw all the cars parked in front of my house, and I watched through the window as she craned her neck to look. Then she drove on to her own dark, cold house. The power company had posted updates saying it could be 3 to 5 days before electricity was restored to our area. The damage was just too extensive, and they were prioritizing hospitals and emergency services. I checked my generator's fuel levels and calculated that I had enough to run for about 4 more days if I was careful. On Christmas Day, things got interesting. I was in the garage, refueling the generator from my stored gas cans, when a police car pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers got out and walked up my driveway. My heart sank, wondering what rule I had supposedly broken now. "Keith Donovan," the older officer asked. He was in his 40s with graying hair and a tired expression. "That's me." "I'm Officer Williams. This is Officer Chen." We received a complaint about illegal generator usage. I laughed before I could stop myself. Illegal? There's nothing illegal about owning a generator. The complaint states that you're running a generator from an unapproved structure and that it's causing a disturbance to your neighbors. Let me guess. Patricia Henderson filed the complaint. Officer Williams glanced at his notes. The complaint came from the HOA president, yes. Officers, my generator is properly installed with a city permit and inspected transfer switch. It's not illegal in any way. The HOA has an issue with the shed it's housed in, but that's a civil matter, not a criminal one. And as for disturbing neighbors, I've had a dozen people in my house over the past 2 days warming up and charging their phones. You're welcome to ask any of them if they find my generator disturbing. Officer Chen spoke up for the first time. "Can we see the permits?" I brought them the paperwork, which I had wisely kept in a folder in the house. They examined everything, asked a few questions about the installation, and then handed it back. "Everything looks in order," Officer Williams said. "Look, we've been getting a lot of calls today. People are cold, stressed, and taking it out on each other. Your generator is fine. The noise complaint is obviously bogus since we can barely hear it from the street, but maybe try to keep things peaceful with your HOA." "I'm not the one causing problems, officer." He gave me a knowing look. "HOA disputes are the worst. Good luck with it." After they left, I was furious all over again. Patricia had actually called the police on me for running a generator during a power outage. It was beyond petty. It was vindictive. Rachel urged me to let it go, to just get through the crisis and deal with the HOA issues later. But I couldn't stop thinking about Patricia sitting in her cold house, angry that I was comfortable while she wasn't, angry enough to try to weaponize the police against me. The power came back on December 27th, 5 days after it went out. Our neighborhood was one of the last to be restored because of the extensive tree damage. During those 5 days, my generator ran almost continuously, and my house remained a refuge for neighbors who needed to warm up, charge devices, or just escape the cold for a while. When the electricity finally returned, I was relieved but also oddly proud. My preparedness had paid off. The generator shed had done exactly what it was supposed to do, and I had been able to help people because of it. The HOA fines, of course, had continued to accumulate. By January 2nd, when I finally checked my account, I owed over $2,000 in penalties for the unapproved shed. There was also a new violation notice for running a business from residential property, apparently because I had let neighbors warm up in my house during the outage. That was it. That was the moment I decided to stop playing defense and go on offense. I spent the first week of January researching Ohio HOA law and documenting everything. I pulled up emails, violation notices, and payment records. I took photos of my shed with measurements and angles showing it wasn't visible from the street. I got written statements from neighbors thanking me for helping them during the power outage. I documented the timeline of my approval request and the HOA's delayed response. Then, I found something interesting in the Riverside Meadows HOA bylaws that I had somehow missed before. According to Section 12, any board decision could be overturned by a vote of the general membership if at least 30% of homeowners signed a petition calling for a special meeting. Our community had 240 homes, which meant I needed 72 signatures. I drafted a petition calling for a special meeting to vote on 3 items: overturning the denial of my shed approval, removing the accumulated fines, and reviewing the HOA board's enforcement practices. Then, I started going door to door. It was easier than I expected. The people I had helped during the power outage were eager to sign. Many other neighbors had their own horror stories about Patricia and the board, complaints about petty fines and arbitrary enforcement. By January 10th, I had 93 signatures. I submitted the petition to the HOA office in person. Patricia was there, and when she read through the pages of signatures, her face went pale, then red. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're wasting everyone's time over a shed." "Actually, I'm exercising my rights as a homeowner according to the bylaws. You have 2 weeks to schedule the meeting. The board will fight this. They're welcome to try." The special meeting was scheduled for January 24th at the community center. I spent the 2 weeks preparing my presentation, making copies of all my documentation, and talking to as many neighbors as possible. Several people offered to speak on my behalf at the meeting. Rachel was nervous about the whole thing. "What if you lose?" she asked the night before the meeting. "What if they vote against you?" "Then I'll have to remove the shed and eat the fines," I admitted. "But at least I'll know I tried. And honestly, I think the bigger issue is that Patricia and the board need to be held accountable. This isn't just about me anymore." The community center was packed on January 24th. Every chair was filled, and people lined the walls. I had never seen this many neighbors in one place before. Apparently, a lot of people had issues with the HOA that they had been too intimidated to raise before. Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. She tried to establish procedural rules that would have limited discussion, but several people objected, and she was forced to back down. Finally, she turned the floor over to me. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, my printed materials in hand. I had prepared a whole speech, but looking at the faces of my neighbors, I decided to keep it simple. "My name is Keith Donovan. I built a generator shed in my backyard to protect my family during power outages. The HOA denied my approval request for aesthetic reasons, even though the shed meets all building codes and isn't visible from the street. During the December storm, when all of you were without power, my generator kept my family warm and safe. It also allowed me to help dozens of neighbors who needed a warm place or a way to charge their phones. The HOA responded by fining me over $2,000 and calling the police on me for helping people." I held up the documentation. "I have here all the paperwork showing that I followed the proper procedures, that the HOA delayed my review, and that their denial was based on vague aesthetic concerns rather than any legitimate issue. I also have statements from neighbors thanking me for my help during the crisis. I pass the papers around the room. This isn't really about a shed. It's about whether our HOA exists to help homeowners or to harass them. It's about whether rules should be enforced fairly or used as weapons against people the board doesn't like. And it's about basic common sense. We live in Ohio. We get winter storms. Having a generator is responsible, not a violation. I sat down to scattered applause. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but the mood in the room was clearly against her. Gregory Stevens, the board member I had thought might be reasonable, asked to speak. He stood up and cleared his throat. I want to say that I think the board made a mistake here. I voted against denying Keith's shed, for the record. I thought the aesthetic concerns were overblown. But I was outvoted. Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel, but he continued. I also think we need to review how we handle these situations. The point of an HOA is to maintain property values and community standards, not to punish people for being prepared. Keith's generator didn't hurt anyone. It helped people. We should be encouraging that kind of responsibility, not fining it. More applause, louder this time. Other neighbors started speaking up, some telling their own stories of HOA overreach. A woman named Jennifer talked about being fined because her rose bushes were the wrong shade of pink. A man named Carlos described being cited for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight. An older couple, the Hendersons, no relation to Patricia, detailed how they had been forced to remove a wheelchair ramp because it didn't match the original architecture of their house. The meeting went on for over 2 hours. Patricia tried several times to regain control, to steer the conversation back to procedural matters, but the homeowners weren't having it. This had become something bigger than my shed. It had become a referendum on how the HOA was run. Finally, we got to the vote. The question was simple. Should Keith Donovan's generator shed be retroactively approved and all fines removed? By show of hands, 137 people voted yes. 12 voted no. The rest abstained. Patricia's face was white as she recorded the results. "The motion passes," she said through gritted teeth. "The shed is approved and the fines are removed." But people weren't done. Someone in the back of the room called out, "I motion that we also vote on the board's performance. I want a vote of no confidence." This wasn't on the agenda, and Patricia tried to rule it out of order, but the crowd was having none of it. After 15 minutes of arguing about procedures, it was agreed that while they couldn't remove board members outside of the normal election cycle, they could hold a non-binding vote expressing the community's opinion. The vote on the board was even more lopsided. 153 people voted no confidence in Patricia's leadership. Even some of the board members abstained rather than vote in support of her. When the meeting finally ended, Patricia gathered her papers and left without speaking to anyone. Gregory came over to shake my hand. "You did a good thing here tonight," he said. "This board needed a wake-up call. For what it's worth, I'm going to push for policy changes at the next meeting, clearer guidelines, better communication, and an end to this petty enforcement." "I appreciate that," I said. "I never wanted this to become a whole thing. I just wanted to keep my family safe." "I know. But sometimes these things need to happen." Over the next few weeks, things changed in Riverside Meadows. Patricia remained president technically, but she was essentially powerless. She stopped showing up to the HOA office regularly. The other board members started making decisions without her. In March, she announced that she and her husband were moving to Arizona, and she resigned from the board effective immediately. The new board president was Gregory, and true to his word, he pushed through several reforms. The approval process for minor structures was streamlined. Fines were reduced and could only be imposed after multiple warnings. And perhaps most importantly, the architectural review standards were rewritten to focus on objective criteria rather than subjective aesthetic judgments. My generator shed stood proud in my backyard, no longer a source of controversy. When another winter storm hit in February, smaller than the December one but still significant enough to knock out power for a day, several neighbors came by to thank me again for being prepared. A few of them had even bought their own generators and asked for my advice on installation. Rachel and I sat in our warm living room during that February storm, listening to the generator hum outside, and she squeezed my hand. "Was it worth it?" she asked. "All the stress and fighting?" I thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," I said. "I think it was. Not just because we won, but because it needed to happen. Patricia was making people miserable, and nobody wanted to stand up to her. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's exhausting." "My hero," she said with a smile, and I knew she meant it. The generator shed still stands today, a simple 8x6 structure painted gray to match my house trim. Inside, the Champion generator sits ready, maintained and tested regularly. It's more than just emergency equipment now. It's a reminder that sometimes the rules need to be challenged, that common sense should prevail over arbitrary authority, and that being prepared isn't just smart, it's a responsibility. Every time I look at it, I think about those 5 days in December when the power was out and the neighborhood was dark and cold. I think about Patricia sitting in her house, angry that I had found a way to protect my family while she suffered. I think about the neighbors who came to my door seeking warmth and help, and how good it felt to be able to provide it. But mostly, I think about how easy it would have been to give in, to tear down the shed and hope for the best. I think about how many people probably would have done just that, would have accepted Patricia's arbitrary ruling and moved on. And I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I stood my ground. Because the thing about bullies, whether they're schoolyard kids or HOA presidents, is that they only have power if you give it to them. They rely on people being too tired, too intimidated, or too conflict-averse to fight back. But when you stand up to them, when you shine a light on their petty tyranny and make them justify their actions in front of everyone, they usually crumble. Patricia's resignation wasn't just about my shed. It was about years of accumulated resentment from a community that had been nickel and dimed with ridiculous fines and harassed over trivial violations. My fight gave other people permission to voice their own complaints, to say that they were tired of being pushed around, and to demand better. The reforms Gregory implemented made Riverside Meadows a genuinely better place to live. Property values didn't decline, as Patricia had darkly warned they would. If anything, they went up slightly because people actually wanted to live in a community that was reasonable rather than dictatorial. The neighborhood became friendlier, more cohesive. Block parties happened more often. People looked out for each other, and when the next serious storm rolled through in March of the following year, I wasn't the only one with a generator anymore. 15 other families had installed them, some in sheds similar to mine, others in garages or on concrete pads. The neighborhood weathered that storm better than any before it, with pockets of power and warmth scattered throughout the development. I even helped Tom Martinez from next door install his generator and build a small shed for it. We spent a weekend working together, and as we hammered and measured and painted, he told me about his own experiences with Patricia. Apparently, she had once threatened to fine him for having Christmas lights up past January 1st, even though he had been dealing with a family emergency and hadn't had time to take them down. She acted like I was deliberately trying to ruin the neighborhood, Tom said, shaking his head. They were just lights, but she treated it like I had committed a crime. I took them down and apologized, but I always resented it. I wish I had stood up to her like you did. You can stand up to the next person who tries something like that, I said. That's what matters. Not letting it happen again. The story of my generator shed became something of a legend in the community. New residents would hear about it, about the guy who defied the HOA and won. Some people thought it was funny, others found it inspiring. A few probably thought I had been unnecessarily difficult, but I didn't really care what anyone thought because I knew the truth. I had done the right thing. I had protected my family, helped my neighbors, and stood up to someone who needed to be stood up to. The generator shed wasn't just a building anymore. It was a symbol of resistance against arbitrary authority, a reminder that rules should serve people, not the other way around. On the anniversary of the December storm, Rachel and I had a party. We invited all the neighbors who had sheltered at our house during those cold days, plus everyone who had signed my petition. We grilled burgers and hot dogs in the backyard, right next to the famous generator shed. People took photos with it, jokingly calling it a historic landmark. Patricia wasn't invited, obviously. She had moved to Arizona months earlier, and as far as I knew, she was terrorizing some new HOA there. I didn't wish her ill exactly. I just hoped she would eventually learn that wielding petty power over people's lives wasn't actually fulfilling, that being respected was better than being feared, and that sometimes the rules really were stupid. But I doubted she would learn any of that. People like Patricia rarely changed. They just moved on to new places where they could start the cycle over again. That's why it was so important that we had stopped her when we did, that we had established new precedents and new leadership in Riverside Meadows. We couldn't control what Patricia did elsewhere, but we could make sure our community wouldn't tolerate that kind of behavior anymore. As the sun set on that anniversary party, I stood by the generator shed with a beer in my hand, watching my neighbors laugh and talk in my backyard. Gregory came over and clinked his bottle against mine. "Quite a year," he said. "Quite a year," I agreed. "You know, I've been thinking about running for the National HOA Reform Organization's board," he continued. "There are communities all over the country dealing with the same kind of stuff we went through. Maybe I could help change things on a bigger scale. That's ambitious." "Yeah, well, you inspired me. If one guy with a generator shed can take down a petty tyrant, imagine what we could do with real organizational support." I laughed. "Good luck with that. Just remember, at the end of the day, it's about common sense. Rules should make sense. Enforcement should be fair. And people should be able to protect their families without jumping through 1,000 hoops." "Words to live by," Gregory said. The party went late into the evening, and eventually people started heading home. Rachel and I cleaned up, then sat on our back deck looking at the shed in the moonlight. "Do you think we'll stay here long term?" Rachel asked. "In this neighborhood, I mean, after everything that happened?" I considered the question. A year ago, I might have said no. The fight with the HOA had been stressful and exhausting, and there had been moments when I wanted nothing more than to sell the house and move somewhere without a homeowners association. But now, with Patricia gone and the new reforms in place, Riverside Meadows actually felt like home. "Yeah," I said. "I think we'll stay. We've got good neighbors now. The HOA is actually reasonable. And besides, I'm not going to let someone like Patricia chase me out of my own home. We fought for this place. We made it better. That means something." Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder. "Good. Because I really like it here now. It feels like a real community." And she was right. That's what we had built through all the conflict and struggle, not just a victory over an unreasonable HOA president, but a genuine sense of community. People knew each other now. They looked out for each other. They weren't afraid to speak up when something was wrong. The generator shed had been the catalyst for all of it. A simple 8x6 structure built to house emergency equipment had become the spark that transformed an entire neighborhood. It had exposed the problems with our HOA, united people who had suffered in silence, and ultimately created lasting change. Sometimes I would go out to the shed just to look at it, to remember everything that had happened. The generator inside purred to life every week during my routine maintenance tests, ready to protect us if needed. But it was more than just a machine now. It was a testament to the importance of standing your ground, of not letting petty authorities push you around, and of being prepared for whatever life throws at you. Because that's the thing about generators. They sit idle most of the time, waiting. But when the power goes out, when the storm hits and everything goes dark, they're there. They kick on, they do their job, and they keep you safe and warm while everyone else scrambles in the cold. My generator shed had done exactly that, both literally during the December storm and metaphorically during the fight with the HOA. It had been there when I needed it, providing light and warmth while Patricia's petty tyranny collapsed around her. I had watched them lose heat while I stayed perfectly warm, and I wasn't ashamed to admit that there had been a certain satisfaction in that. Not because I enjoyed seeing people suffer, but because the contrast had been so stark, so undeniable. My preparedness versus their vindictiveness. My common sense versus their arbitrary rules. My willingness to help versus their determination to punish. The generator shed stood as proof that I had been right all along, that being prepared mattered, that some rules deserved to be challenged, that standing up to bullies, even when it was hard and stressful and expensive, was worth it in the end. And every time the power flickered during a storm, every time the generator kicked on and kept our house running, I was reminded of why I had fought so hard. Because protection matters. Preparation matters. Family matters. And no HOA president, no matter how petty or vindictive, was going to take that away from me. The shed still stands today, a monument to common sense prevailing over bureaucratic nonsense. And I hope it stands for many years to come, keeping my family safe and reminding everyone who sees it that sometimes the right thing to do is build what you need and defend it with everything you have. Because in the end, that's what the story of my generator shed is really about. Not revenge, not schadenfreude, not even victory over a difficult adversary. It's about the fundamental right to protect yourself and your family, to prepare for emergencies, and to refuse to be pushed around by people who have forgotten that rules are supposed to serve us, not control us. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. And as I sat on my deck on that anniversary evening, warm and comfortable and surrounded by good neighbors, I was glad I had been the one to teach it to her.